if you're like me, you may have been here before. I'm on 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan in the heart of New York City. But if you're like me, I bet you had no idea that on this very block, history was made. The date was April the 3rd, 1973. It was made by a man named Martin Cooper. He was working for Motorola at the time. How did he make history? Well, it turned out he had a prototype of this, the world's first cell phone. In fact, it was on this block that he made the world's first call with a cell phone. Who did he call? Well, it turned out he called his rival across the Hudson River who was working at Bell Labs for AT&T. And why did he call from this intersection? Well, it's because when he hung up, he walked across the street to go into the Hilton Hotel. That's where Motorola held its press conference to announce this new invention. But as we look back from a vantage point of almost 50 years later, I think there's a few lessons that speak to our own future. The first is this. Did you know it took a full 11 years until March of 1984 to go from that phone call to the availability of this, the first cell phone that was sold to consumers? It took Motorola 11 years to continue to perfect the technology. Now, that seems like a long time, but in many ways it makes a lot of sense. There was a huge amount of innovation that was still needed. And even when this phone was first sold, you had to plug it in for 10 hours, and even then you only had enough battery life to use it for 35 minutes. It's almost the opposite of what we're used to today. There's a second lesson that I think is also really interesting. It's not just about creating a product, it's about building an ecosystem. It's about helping companies build the components that go into a device. It's about helping companies create apps to run on the platform. It's about equipping customers with the skills and the know-how to put technology to work. That is as important, perhaps even more important today than it was 50 years ago. And there's a final lesson that I think is interesting as well. Motorola couldn't sell this until it persuaded the regulators at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, to get on board, to allocate the spectrum that would be needed. That too is important for all of us today. It's fascinating to look back at the progress of technology over 50 years. It's fascinating to think about how much things have advanced. Today, we use these devices to do almost everything under the sun. For most people, we send a text message before we make a phone call. But thankfully, you can still pick this up and use it as a phone. After all, every once in a while, I might hold something like this. It might ring. It's the 1980s calling. They want their phone back. You know what? I think for all of us, we like looking at this, but we're happy to give it back. We have something so much better today.